EverGrande was also the starting point of the global financial meltdown. It was the first phase, which started at the end of 21. Now, 4 years later, we have seen several phases in the financial meltdown. We are in a kind of a financial matrix, and the financial matrix is going to break down. The second phase was the start of the Ukraine war. Then the interest rates went up. This is the third phase, and currently we are in the fourth phase. Since then, the gold price went up from 1,750 an ounce to almost 3,500 right now. And actually, I predicted this sharp rise in the gold price, and it's still not the end. We will see higher gold prices. Gold is still very cheap. The same applies for silver. Yeah.
You absolutely called it. You called gold back here on this channel in 2021, 2022.
From an external shock, a vicious cycle leads to paper money will be worthless. Yeah. And we are shortly before such a situation. The gold short squeeze is very likely.
We were first discussing it when it was still around $1,800 an ounce. Silver was still around $17, $18 an ounce. We were discussing this very thing in regards to EverGrande, the financial crisis, precious metals, silver, and gold. You were telling people this is going to moon, and pretty soon it's going to be 2, 3, 4,000. We're already at a new all-time highs for gold, around $3,500 an ounce. We're currently around $34, $35 an ounce for silver, which is basically doubled since we were talking about it a few years ago as well. So you definitely called EverGrande, you called gold and silver. What do you think is going to happen with the price of these precious metals in the near-term future, in the next 12 months, the next 24 months?
Actually, it depends what will happen with the inspection of Fort Knox. Right now is the time to say something about the financial system and also the gold reserves in the US, because in February this year, Donald Trump and Elon Musk announced that Fort Knox has to be inspected. They announced that they will inspect Fort Knox and look if the gold is still there, but they have not done, or maybe they have done, but they do not dare to announce what they have found.
I think that's very possible.
Trump said they will not inspect Fort Knox because everybody knows that the gold is there. For example, the German government is doubting their gold. Germany has around 1,200 tons worth 115 billion US dollar gold in the States. There is a movement in Germany to call back these 1,200 tons of gold very soon. And this is a consequence of this discussion, and not confirming that the gold is there. But even if the gold was there, it is known that every piece of gold is loaned out 500 times. If you buy an ETF gold, it cannot be delivered because every piece of gold is sold 500 times or more. There's a naked short of gold, which the central banks did over decades. If they could show that there's the gold, it's not owned by them because they sold it several times. If somebody like Germany would start to withdraw the gold, then it can come to a short squeeze. Then the gold price can go up to 10,000 more an ounce. But you have to hold the gold in hand. The same applies to silver. Yeah. So
you've got my attention.
Yeah.
That's for damn sure. I'm hearing there's a pretty high potential for a short squeeze in these precious metals.
Yes.
Especially with the rehypothecations that you mentioned. Rehypothecations, for people that are unaware, means lending or selling the same asset multiple times over and over again. Very similar to having one car, but creating 1,000 titles for that car, selling it to 1,000 different people. And then when it comes time to deliver that car, well, there's only still one car left over, meaning that you have to go out and buy more cars to deliver to the people to whom you've sold titles. That is the very essence of a short squeeze. Like you've mentioned, physical silver in hand, physical gold in hand is key. Thanks again, Dr. Metzler, for joining us. I saw you on various news sources like Reuters talking about the potential situation or significant losses in these banks and other groups, including Citadel, that held a large amount of the bonds in EverGrande Group and their subsidiary companies. EverGrande, China's second largest real estate company, appeared to have been working directly with the CCP and with mainstream media to make it appear as if they had not gone completely insolvent, as if they were still paying their bills. There was collusion there between the banks that had to write off hundreds of billions, almost $500 billion in unrealized losses from one company alone, being EverGrande, China's second largest real estate developer. Dr. Metzler, you bought the bond coupons in EverGrande Group and you were not receiving payments on them. You were one of the main factors in actually getting EverGrande into bankruptcy court. Now they've finally gone into
I also
bankruptcy.
went twice to Cayman, even in the COVID times, to file a bankruptcy case. For people who do not know what we have done, in September 21, China EverGrande was shortly before a default, and the mass media reported that China EverGrande was paying coupons to 25 billion of outstanding debt. Me and my team bought bonds of China EverGrande just to show that China is in default. Actually, we did not receive the coupons in September and October 21 and could show that they are in default, even though the mass media did report that they had paid it. And this went on until March 22, where officially China EverGrande did admit that the coupons had not been paid. But can you imagine, for 6 months, a company had been in default, but the mass media did report falsely about it. So something was ongoing there, and we highlighted that. And yeah, that was a challenging time because we got a lot of comments positively, but also negatively. But at the end, we had been right, and so far nothing has happened. And I think there's something wrong here to talk about. Yeah,
The bureaucrats in government working together again to hide the reality of what's actually happening. How'd that go?
There had been political pressures, and I could not find a liquidator at that time, and so they avoided that.
But explain why you couldn't find a liquidator. I'm sure there's plenty of liquidators in the Cayman Islands.
Of course, but nobody wanted to accept the mandate. It was very challenging.
I wonder how much the CCP or EverGrande Group executives were paying the liquidators in Cayman Islands to keep their mouths shut. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't the CEO of EverGrande Group get put under watch and get arrested for some of the happenings there with some of the largest financial fraud in the history of China?
Yeah. And after we could not file a bankruptcy case, we filed a criminal case against EverGrande in the Caymans, saying about delaying the bankruptcy process, and it got rejected from the Cayman authorities. So can you imagine?
Corruption at the very highest level, even still through today. But what you did was a phenomenal thing. It's unfortunate that it had to be like that, but the reality is that when you've got that many people at risk of losing tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars, they're going to do as much as possible to try to sell off their positions or push off their positions. Do you think that some of these firms were able to sell them for pennies on the dollar, or did the majority of them had to hold and eat
Yes,
those unrealized
benefited. a lot of institutions in delaying the bankruptcy. And also there had been a lot of fire sales ongoing. So the best assets had been sold to priority investors. Insolvency proceedings started in late 22, early 23. And this was far too late. The outstanding 22 billion bonds will not see a penny. Nobody from the bondholders will recover anything. That's fact.
The liquidators are expected to recover only 5 to 10% of the amount that they're actually owed from selling off the assets from China EverGrande Group. You think they get more or less?
No, I think there will be nothing left after the liquidator has been paid. Yeah.
After the liquidator takes their cut, there's not going to be a dime left over, basically.
Yes, it was a Ponzi scheme. The international bondholders had been the victims of the Ponzi scheme. Yeah, but EverGrande was also the starting point of the global financial meltdown. It was the first phase, which started at the end of 21. Right now, we are 4 years later. We have seen several phases in the financial meltdown. The second phase was the start of the Ukraine war. Then the interest rates went up. This is the third phase. And currently we are in the fourth phase. Since then, the gold price went up from 1,750 an ounce to almost 3,500 right now. And actually, I predicted this sharp rise in the gold price, and it's still not the end. We will see higher gold prices. Gold is still very cheap. The same applies for silver.
You have an option through one of your companies in which you guys actually hold silver and gold through a crypto coin. Is that correct?
We introduced a gold-backed coin in Dubai. The website is serious.money. The retail demand is actually too small. So actually we put the project on hold and we will reactivate it once you cannot buy gold around the corner. There will be a retail demand once people see that the paper gold you cannot trust. Maybe also the gold trading will be prohibited 100 years ago. Once this happens, then the valid business model.
I think you're right.
That's the current status.
A lot of people forget that there's been several times now in human history where people's gold and silver had been confiscated from them, where they had been unable to buy or sell it. And people have become complacent with having the ability to trade these exchange traded funds and to have things like PSLV and SLV and such, where they're just buying numbers on a screen, ones and zeros, and they don't actually have the silver and gold in hand. And you can still buy it at pawn shops, and even Costco is selling gold bars now. And at some point here, especially if there's countries like China, like Germany, etc., start to claw back some of their holdings here in the United States is going to have to deliver that, whether it's in Fort Knox or not, to the actual precious metals industry, where the rehypothecations are going to have to be closed, when the failures to deliver are going to have to be delivered. The actual silver and gold ratio being 80 to 1, 90 to 1 is going to absolutely collapse when they must go out on the open market and buy it to give everyone their actual silver and gold. Because 97% of all precious metals derivatives, silver and gold's derivatives traded by banks, are occurring in dark pools. So within these dark pools, a lot of these banks are hiding the reality of what's going on and suppressing the price of gold and silver artificially. But as you mentioned, if the news comes out that Fort Knox is missing gold and silver, we're looking at a short squeeze of unrivaled potential here. So the reality of the fact is that I think you might be right, and it might have been a little too early for some retail investors to be able to use that crypto, especially since crypto is still undergoing a larger adoption. But I think as time goes on, more people will start to see the benefit of that, especially if you can discuss with the new Securities Exchange Commission here and Paul Atkins are very crypto friendly and the ability to get it launched here in the United States. Because up until now, serious money with a gold back and silver back crypto coin hasn't been able to trade in the United States.
No, we had no license in the States. That's correct. Yeah.
So yeah, I think that there's a good potential there that in the near future that might change for you guys. And I think having the United States market open to something like a gold and silver backed crypto might have some serious potential. What are your thoughts here on the President of the United States, Donald Trump, pushing the Fed to reduce rates?
The world is looking at this fight between Trump and Powell. I think Trump will be successful. He will put his will to lower interest. He will be at the end successful, and it might help to grow the economy, but it is not creating any confidence in the dollar. The fight between Trump and Powell is weakening the position of the dollar as a leading world currency. In addition, US government bonds are being sold by China to buy gold and also by Japan to stabilize the yen. And these government bonds have to be bought by the Fed. Yeah? And at some point, it's not possible to stabilize it or to balance it. And then due to tariff confusion, there are external shocks in the financial markets. And this can lead to actually that maybe the government bonds cannot be sold or is not liquid enough. Like in a movie which had been released in 2014, How Money Became Worthless. If you watch this movie, then they explain that out of a sudden, from an external shock, a vicious cycle leads to paper money will be worthless. Yeah. And we are shortly before such a situation. The gold short squeeze is very likely. And not that only, it can happen in a book, Patriots, from James Wesley Wallace, describes from this breakdown of the financial system, then it leads to riots in the US and the breakdown of society, so that you should be prepared to have your own food to survive. These are scenarios which some years were not very likely, but now it's getting likelihood that you have to consider it and to prepare yourselves to grow your own food, to have your gold at home, to prepare you for a breakdown of the financial system which can come overnight.
I think a lot of people fail to realize just how quickly this can happen. For example, in the last 2 weeks, the United States dollar has lost over 6% of its value. That's insanely quickly. And that might seem minuscule to some, but when you think back to the inflation we've seen since 2020, from the beginning of the Biden era spending spree, the value of the fiat currency has dropped dramatically. In many cases, you could easily say 30, 50% or more already just in that time alone. And that probably relates to and correlates directly to the price of gold going from $1,700 an ounce to $3,500 an ounce. Price of silver going from $17 an ounce to $34. As the US dollar is losing value, gold and silver continue to increase their value, continue to hold their value. And that should be a telling sign for a lot of people. We've got guns, we've got land. That's a plus for a lot of people, but a lot of people are living in cities with very small plots and no gardens and no ability to farm, and they're completely reliant on the supermarket. So it sounds like you're saying we need to have some sort of ability to be sustainable, even if it's not complete sustainability, but to be able to supplement your food and your vegetables, your fruit, even things like that, maybe even with livestock
or the electricity, that you have some solar panels on the roof.
And some sort of solar power to be able to protect against issues with the power grid. Having gold and silver, so in case the value of the dollar turns into toilet paper, which in a lot of cases it already is, it's happened in many countries, this remains king, and people are actually able to trade with their silver and gold and buy essentials and continue to move forward and protect their family.
Yeah.
So there are definitely some concrete things we can do regarding sustainability with our own food, having stores of food, being able to grow food, livestock, maintain our own power grid, our own energy and different sources, as well as to be able to protect ourselves and to have land in which we can do these things. It seems to be more and more important as these issues continue to happen and exacerbate with the global financial system. What's happening right now, it looks like a downward trend in inflation. And that actually took me by surprise here in the United States, especially considering that a lot of economists, not all, but some economists say that tariffs are inflationary. At the same time, the United States has been bringing in record amounts of revenue from said tariffs, and inflation is actually down. The average egg price right now is down from last year at $6.50 US for a carton of 12 eggs, and is currently sitting around $2.50. Or fuel has also dropped dramatically, but in some cases, it could be argued that is due to supply and demand, due to a weakening economy, a decrease in GDP growth here in the United States, meaning fewer demand for domestic trucking, causing a decrease in oil and gas prices. But what are your thoughts here on what we've seen in this decrease in short-term inflation versus the potential for more long-term inflation over the next 12, 24, 36 months and going forward?
I think that the inflation rate faked. I'm traveling a lot in the US. I'm also traveling a lot in Europe. The food prices and the prices for living of the regular people, it's extremely up. If you go to the supermarket in the US right now, or I have been, I look at it now for 3 years, and it is crazy how the food prices went up. And the same is happening also in Europe. So if you buy a bar of chocolate, it was lower than €1, and now you have to pay €3 for it. A 300% increase within 2 years. I think the official rates are influenced by maybe a lower electronic TV or computer prices. I think the regular people have less money left, and also the debt of the regular people in Europe and also in the US has grown dramatically. And
You bring up a great point, actually, because what we've seen with inflation is that the cost of certain goods, non-essential goods, has come down, right? Like you said, televisions, computer monitors, computers, some cellular phones, and things like that have decreased in value, or should I say decreased in cost quite significantly. Whereas other more essential items, such as housing, utilities, and food, which are Americans and basically people all around the world, top three. We've got housing is number one, you got food is number two, and utilities are number three, are the top expenses for the vast majority of people. And I think a lot of people fail to realize that even though inflation has decreased, it is still already very elevated over where it was 4 years ago, right? So we've already seen a very fast increase. And even though it's lower, it is still increasing in price every month, every quarter, and every year. And with potential for some major macroeconomic shocks, particularly when you start to price in the opportunity there for tariffs or even more wars. We're seeing some increases in talks about China basically invading Taiwan. Do you have any insights on that? Because a lot of people for a long time now have said that's just nonsense, that's just posturing. But the reality is that Taiwan is a part of China, at least it has been for forever, basically. What are your thoughts on the possibility of China actually invading Taiwan or taking it over?
It can happen, but would be an external shock, which would have heavy influence on the global financial system. I think it would be the start of the final phase of the global financial meltdown.
We just saw that Zelensky in Ukraine recently attacked Russian bombers and Russian planes and facilities very far from the front lines. It appears as if we're seeing a major escalation in the Russia-Ukraine war, whereas there was a potential there for Donald Trump to actually help reduce some of those tensions. And Zelensky has gone out on a limb here and done the complete opposite, has basically done everything he can to continue to keep the war going between Russia and Ukraine. Now we're having the potential talks here for the United States to leave NATO. At least it's been spoken about in depth by a multitude of different generals and congressmen and senators. What are your thoughts on the potential here for the escalation further with Russia and Ukraine and the possibility for China invading Taiwan occurring at the same time? And how do you see that affecting prices of goods and inflation around the world?
Actually, Europe is investing more into weapons. They came to the insight that they have to invest more into defense. And that's a consequence already. Defense stocks in Europe are going up, and the gold mine stocks are going up. Defense and gold mine are good investments right now. But the likelihood that we have a peace in Europe, I don't think that there will be a solution soon. And if the tensions continue, there can be external shocks. The consequence could be that China is taking over Taiwan, and then this is definitely the last phase of global financial meltdown. My thesis is that the only way out, and is very that we have to hyperinflate it, okay? There's no other way to get rid of the debt and to continue this way. So you at some point you have to hyperinflate it, but it has consequences for the society and could even create wars and internal riots. If the dollar or the euro would hyperinflate, it really has serious consequences.
I think you're absolutely right there. And it almost seems like that's what the country has to do in order to continue to pay its debt. We saw here in the United States, for example, the debt took from the 1700s through the late 2010s to get to $12 trillion. And since that, basically since the late 2010s through today, we have seen it more than double already. So another 12 trillion in less than a decade. What previously took hundreds of years now took under a decade to happen here in this country. And do you think that is being done purposefully by the Fed through this printing, by the federal government, to hyperinflate the dollar to make it easier for them to pay the interest and the debt on it?
Yes, they made this decision and did not communicate it, and they follow it. In a lot of my posts, I say hyperinflation is inevitable. That's what I think. But if it happens next year, in 5 years, or in 10 years, but it will happen in our lifetime.
That's a scary thought. So I hope that people are actually preparing. I know that your intention here is not to scare people. Your intention is to educate people, to give them an opportunity.
To educate and to prepare, as I mentioned before, to grow food, to get a little bit of gold and silver, just to prevent that you lose everything.
You're absolutely right. The more people that heed your warning, that look at what's happened over the last 10 years compared to what's happened over the last several hundred in history, should be understanding of the fact that times are changing. We're not talking go out and dig a bunker, but we're talking become more sustainable, be prepared for changes, because times are moving along very quickly.
And it happened before several times, so history is repeating. It's nothing new.
No, we are in the most unaffordable housing market in the history of the world, hands down. Here in the United States, for example, there are 33% more home sellers than there are buyers. A lot of the buyers are sitting back on the sidelines due to the high interest rates, the overvaluation of homes, the high inflation we've seen over the last few years, and the low increased wages that we've seen over the last several years. What do you see happening to the American dream if Jerome Powell doesn't decrease rates? Would that even help?
It would not even help, only delays or accelerates the development. Of course, it would help to inflate If we would lower the interest rates, it would help only short term, but in the midterm, it would even get worse. But actually, they already made the decision. You cannot prevent it anymore. You only can accelerate or slow it down a little bit.
So
unfortunately, that's the truth.
The Fed is damned if they do and damned if they don't. Basically, the
Yeah.
government, the Fed,
Yes.
the value of this damn toilet paper right here. There's nothing they can do to save it. It's just a matter of time because they've been
Yeah.
kicking the can for a long time. We've saw it since the 2008 GFC, and this is just a continuation of what we saw then. Am I wrong?
Yes, that's correct. So we are in a kind of a financial matrix, and the financial matrix is going to break down. And you can go back to an older version of the financial matrix to buy gold and silver. And this is the backup solution. And from the backup solution, we have to build a new financial system. This new financial system must be backed with gold, but there is not enough gold available. So it's very important that you own, or there are a lot of gold mines. So gold mines are future gold. And this will be the beginning of a new financial system if you collateralize the future gold in the gold mines. This is the new financial system. We will see.
Do you think that
Once it breaks down, I will be there to make suggestions and proposals to create a new financial system.
Do you think that gold, silver, and cryptocurrency will lead the way over the fiat dollar when that happens?
Yes, it's the only way out.
See, that might be part of why the state of Florida has made it now legal to transact in gold and silver once again. They're actually accepting it as a currency. Have you heard about that?
No, but it's a good idea, yeah.
Yeah, I would say so. It's definitely a good idea. For sure. Dr. Metzler, I'm looking forward to another update on the mess in the financial system because we've really appreciated your guidance in dealing with this major bubble that we've seen in these assets over the last few years. And I think a lot of people would have done very well if they had heeded your warning over the last 4 years. I thank you for that. We appreciate you very much. Definitely looking forward to having you on the channel again. Thanks, Dr. Metzler.
Thank you. See you next time.